Hello everyone, Alexa Donne here, and today I am going to be discussing some toxic publishing mindsets that I really hate. An incendiary title, but pretty accurate. These really bug me. A few of them I have been prone to myself and are guilty of. They are toxic mindsets. They don't help you. We're gonna talk about them. Some of them flat out make me mad. There's some snobbery we're gonna be talking about, but just generally unhealthy ideas, unhealthy attitudes that lead to unhealthy behaviors, unproductive behaviors that honestly are going to hold you back either from publishing period, or just from publishing happily. You can get published but be completely miserable because of some of these toxic mindsets, and a few of them will mean nobody likes you. And that's not helpful either. It is possible to be frozen out of publishing socially, meaning if you are awful to enough people. No one likes to work with snobby assholes. So let's dive in and just have some fun. The first super toxic publishing mindset is kind of the zero-sum game mentality. This is taking kind of competitiveness to an unnatural level, to a petty level. We're gonna talk about jealousy, and jealousy is kind of part of this, but there's like jealousy that only hurts you versus jealousy that hurts other people. This is jealousy that hurts other people because you basically get it in your mind that other people's success actively holds you back from being successful. Thus, you feel competitive with them, you dislike them. In some cases, you see people who go after people who they see as competition because of this mentality. It's inherently selfish, but there's also an aspect of fear to it because it's the idea that if someone else gets a book deal and they are like me, or they're writing things that are similar to me, or they're better at doing what I want to do, and usually it's when they relate to them on some level, they have taken something from me, they're horrible, I hate them, they are my enemy now. And I've seen people subtweet their competition, just fuel gossip behind the scenes, socially exclude them. That's a big one I've seen, where there's someone who's clearly got this mentality and they feel threatened by anyone coming up after them who writes in a similar vein, and instead of being welcoming and being like, hey, welcome to the fam, they're like, I'm gonna try to, if not destroy your career, simply starve you of oxygen so that you won't be as successful as me. It's tacky, it's an asshole move, don't do it. This is possibly the #1 toxic publishing mindset you can have. The other ones are pretty bad. This one though is, it hurts you, it hurts others, and it's just malicious. Yeah. So the second super toxic publishing mentality, I call this one comparison is the thief of joy, something you have probably heard before, and it is very, very true. This toxic mindset is one that I am prone to, that many people are prone to, and I will also let you off the hook in the sense that most of us naturally do this. You gotta fight this toxic mindset, however, because this is the one where jealousy hurts you and can destroy you from the inside out. So this is the mindset of always playing the comparison game. You don't have your eyes on your own paper most of the time. You're always comparing yourself to other people. Why did they have that? Why can't I have this? It's not fair that they had that. Or simply, oh, they're so much better than me. I wish I was like them. I wish I could have that. So whether it manifests as kind of like the anger and the bitterness, I see that a lot. You see it, I mean, this is the trouble with kind of talking to other people, and it's like, why did they get that money and I was only paid this? I think I'm better than they are. There's that side of it, and then there is the more wistful, oh, it's the self-neg, it's the imposter syndrome of like, you're always looking at other people and you're assuming that they are better than you, that they're having a better time than you, that everything's easy for them. And it turns into the cycle of self-loathing. Either way, you're constantly comparing yourself to other people. You aren't easy on yourself, or you're too easy on yourself in some cases. It is a multifaceted one, but the idea is that you are constantly paying more attention to what other people in publishing are doing than paying attention to yourself. And so while this one is a bit more of a natural instinct and it never completely goes away, even as you get better at this toxic mindset, it is indeed the thief of joy, because what it ends up doing with the people who let this mindset eat them alive, just take over them, and it's what they take with them forward into publishing, is they never really experience the highs of publishing, the good things that happen to them, because they're always comparing it to someone else. So they're not able to be happy about that good review or this panel they got to do because, well, they didn't get to do that one, or it wasn't a starred review, and so on and so on. You are allowed to have complex feelings about things like that, don't get me wrong. Like, I haven't thought wistfully about having a starred review, but it's the difference between like, oh, I wish it were a starred review and that bitch got a starred review. That's not fair, and really leaning into the comparison and those sorts of bitter or down on yourself feelings. Something I'll say for both of these, for the zero-sum game and comparison is the thief of joy, is that I firmly believe that a rising tide lifts all boats. While there is competitiveness in the industry, of course, and there are limited spots in a certain way, and some people are going to have it easier than others, generally speaking, we are all in this together, and it's more of a community than it should be a competition. And at least for your own well-being and nurturing of your soul, you're always going to do better fighting against these mindsets by being happy for other people, genuinely happy for other people, and also genuinely appreciating the things that you do have happen to you, because that way you can actually enjoy your own experience without being drugged down by toxic, bitter, negative thoughts. So the next publishing mindset, there's a couple of variations on this, and now we're getting more into the toxic publishing mindsets that are going to hold you back from getting started in a career at all, or can lead to you really stumbling even if you technically make it and not making it long term. The first variation of this is publishing writing is a marathon, not a sprint, but people with this toxic mindset only focus on the sprint part. They are so hyper-focused on one book, a very short period of time, only the first hurdle or few hurdles of publishing, that they lose sight of the longer game. Of course, if you have this mindset, in the short term you may be successful, but you're gonna fall flat on your face in the long term. So what I kind of mean by this with the sprint side is that these are writers who are so focused on, I need an agent, that's all I need, agent, that they might chase trends with their books, they might hastily draft books and query it, and if they don't get an agent in 10 queries, they throw it away and start another one. Or they don't get an agent with 12 queries and they decide to self-publish instead. I mean, that's kind of, I focus on traditional publishing, obviously. That's certainly a toxic mindset if you want to see success in traditional publishing, if you hastily choose self-publishing not for the right reasons, because you didn't immediately see success in traditional publishing. But self-publishing in and of itself is not a bad thing or bad decision. But what can happen with this, you know, like you burn through many manuscripts because you're like agent, it can mean that you're not learning proper editing skills, editing and revising skills, and those are going to be really, really essential for later. Not really kind of digging in on your own writing and figuring out what's not working about a manuscript and then working to fix it is definitely going to hold you back in the long term, because that's something that you need to learn. The flip side of that is, in this kind of sprint mentality, can be the hyper focusing on one book, because it's just like, I need to get an agent and this has to be the one. So whether you're bouncing book to book to book, just chasing that goal but not putting in the proper editing work, or whether you're editing a book to death and over querying it, either way, you are way too hyper focused on the short-term sprint stuff, and you're not thinking long-term about, you know, it's not just getting an agent. There's so much stuff that comes after that. I've also seen this manifest socially, where, you know, they burn bridges with people, they don't think long terms in terms of relationship building, a behavior on social media. I see this just a lot with people who are only thinking 1 to 2 years ahead, and they're not thinking 5 years ahead. And you do actually have to think 5 years ahead, because once you get over that first hurdle, it's not done. I have also seen writers who do get over that first hurdle suffer from the sprint versus a marathon mentality, and that's where they think they're done. They got an agent, they might have even gotten a book deal, it might have even been a really good book deal, and they're like, I have made it, I have arrived, I am set for life, I'm gonna be a famous, awesome, amazing writer, and they dig into the short term. And you see a lot of them not make it long term because they aren't prepared for some of the curveballs that publishing can throw at them, because they were only like, if I make it here, I've made it. And you see it with, they fall flat on their face on book 2, or if their sales aren't good and like people stop kind of blowing smoke up their butt, they don't know what to do. They aren't able to pivot to another book idea. I've definitely seen the social bridge burning here. It's kind of, oh, they made it so they can unfollow those losers who don't have agents yet, or they're mean to their publicist, or what have you. That will potentially come back to bite you. I mean, publishing divas is a whole other toxic mindset that's not actually on this list, but it kind of goes into this one. Anything where you are only focused on short-term thinking when it comes to publishing is a mistake, because publishing is not a sprint. It is 100% a marathon, and a lot of people trip on the track partway through the marathon and do not make it to the end. The fourth toxic mindset, this one, I understand it, but it really makes me sad, and that is pitch contest obsession. I actually think this ties a little bit into, it ties into the comparison of the thief of joy thing, kind of like observing other people and like comparing experiences and wanting what other people have, as well as short-term mentality, the sprint idea, but I don't fault people for it. You see people blow up from pitch contests. Pitch contests can do amazing magical things for a lot of writers, but revolving your entire publishing strategy around pitch contests is definitely a toxic mentality. I've seen far too many people get locked into the cycle. They attach their self-worth as a writer to these various contests, whether it's the application ones, the mentorships, including like author mentor match or pitch wars. It's like, I'm just gonna keep applying until I get in, and every time I don't get in, I actually feel worse about myself. And you know, oftentimes I'll see these writers, they don't query, they just do Twitter pitch after Twitter pitch after Twitter pitch. Or even if they do query, it's this cycle of, I'm querying, I'm applying to the mentorship contest, I'm doing the Twitter pitches, and you're not getting the results back, but you keep doing it. And I see authors who wheel spin for years, and that is what's dangerous about this. They don't move on to another idea, or they just beat themselves up so much about not performing well in pitch contests that it can really impact their confidence as a writer. And I hate that, because simply not all projects and ideas work well in pitch contests. Some of them pitch incredibly poorly, but are great in queries. Querying works, the slush works, and so I'm constantly pushing people like, don't hinge all of your self-worth onto a contest. You can't have your entire publishing future riding on the pie in the sky idea of getting into the perfect contest, doing the showcase, being the wunderkind of the year, because also part of this toxic mindset is also for the people who get into those things or who do well in those things, because it's an adrenaline rush and it's really exciting, but it doesn't always work out. And I've seen authors really chewed up inside by pitch contests and all of kind of the ups and downs that they involve. And what this will sometimes be is, you see it in pitch wars especially, where 1 or 2 or 3 entries do very, very well, but yours doesn't do as well. And then you feel really terrible about yourself. It impacts your self-esteem. And that's the comparison as the thief of joy thing. Pitch contests naturally lead to comparison, and it can be really, really unhealthy. So honestly, sometimes for your mental health, especially if you have a book that is beautifully pitchable in 250 words, but not in 280 characters or what have you, just query, especially if you're ready to go. Don't hold on to your work for 6 months waiting for something. Move forward. Don't let hinging your publishing hopes and dreams on pitch contest success hold you back. And another thing that I see here that's definitely not good is that there are writers who have gotten so wrapped up in the idea of all I gotta do is have a really sexy pitch and get it on Twitter at the right moment and my tweet's gonna blow up. But let me let you in on a little secret. The book still has to be good. I have seen far too many cases where the darlings of various pitch events, sometimes the book isn't even done, so you can't get an agent on an incomplete book usually. And then I've just heard from so many agents, you know, they'll say kind of privately, 90 to 95% of the things that they fave in various pitch contests, the writing's just not there yet. So meaning you're not gonna have a magical publishing experience just because you have a really great pitch. The writing has to be there. And so what's toxic about this mentality potentially is if it means that you're not still working on writing a great book, working on the craft. It all has to kind of be there, all working together. And I will just remind you again and again, querying works. And also just a piece of advice here to the ones that I see doing the same books in pitch contests over and over again for years. I have seen this too many times. It's really painful to me. It can actually hurt you because agents do notice when something is over pitched. They're going to assume no one else wants it, because if they did, you wouldn't still be pitching. And that's actually gonna work against you. And it's also just typically a sign, if it hasn't happened yet, it may not happen, at least not in public pitches. Pull back from those public pitches. But very often, I just wanna say, like, it's time to start something new. The fifth toxic publishing mindset, I hate this one so much. Look, I can be sympathetic about a lot of these, but this one just like burns from the inside. And the thing is, no one actually likes this toxic mindset, and yet it's social climbing. Yeah. This is the individual who is obsessed with the idea of making the right friends, of being in the cool clique, of being accepted by the cool authors, who approaches all of their relationships as transactional. Now, there's obviously a thin line here. I mean, networking is real, networking is a thing, and some relationships are in some ways transactional, but it's a thorny rose bush in publishing. And also, there's a part of this is a lot of people see or perceive social climbing when it's not there, because there is such a thing as you can grow apart from writer friends, you can kind of move in new circles, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you think you're too good for the other circles. Sometimes you do just grow apart from people. Sometimes you don't, you just naturally do not click with people. And also some people literally just don't have time to respond to everyone on social media. And so while you might read a diss into something, raise your hand. I have overanalyzed interactions with people on Twitter, and I shouldn't. I have to stop myself from that. But it's not always a diss. Sometimes it is. And so this one, I mean, obviously if you have this mindset, I would strongly advise you to stop, because it will bite you in the butt. So while on some level it is natural and okay as you move through publishing to want to make new friends who are kind of at the same stage as you, that is natural. So of course when I sold my book and joined my debut group, I wanted to make friends with my fellow debuts to kind of have people to talk with and like ask questions of and exchange information with about the whole debut experience. But what you always see in debut groups like that, without fail, is the individuals who are clearly, they pick and choose who to talk to, who to be friends with based on like how good their agent is and how good their book deal is. I mean, that happens at all stages, but like it's more obvious in a debut group. So if you're doing this, stop. It's not too late. Meaning like, really focus on actually forging real deep friendships. You won't regret it, and don't ditch your friends just because they aren't as successful as you are. I mean, whether you're the successful party in the relationship or the less successful party in the relationship, like there are feelings on both sides. But where this really hurts people is things can shift so quickly in publishing, and that's why this is a toxic mindset. And I see it most often in either freshly agented writers who are just so excited. They're like, I have an agent, but then they'll play the social politics of like, who am I gonna talk to? Or not talking to people who aren't agented, but also debut, like once people get book deals is like the next phase where some people will go really, really hard at this. And the thing that I will tell you is a lot can change between getting your agent, between selling your book and your book coming out. A lot can even change between your first book coming out and your second book coming out, meaning publishing is a constant social game. It's not fun, it's not good, but meaning a person who is on top one moment can very easily be on the bottom at the next. And that sounds really like horrific, but it won't matter as much, so to speak, if you have a high and then you have a low, if you weren't a dick to everyone along the way and you have genuine friendships and people who you actually genuinely like and who genuinely like you. So they're not gonna ditch you or ignore you when you go from a high to a low. But if you were that social climbing person who considered a lot of the relationships transactional, who stopped talking to people who you didn't think were as good as you, well, when the tables turn, you're not gonna have any friends. I have seen it far too many times. And the really bad social climbers do develop reputations in publishing. Again, I will disclaim, no one is perfect and everyone has had that perceived slight. And you always have to kind of like play the question mark of like, was it or wasn't it? And I try to give people the benefit of the doubt. It's patterns that show up. And just generally tied to the toxic mindset of social climbing or over focusing on social relationships in publishing, the other part of this, even if you're not social climbing intentionally, but you do get kind of involved in clique politics and being friends with the right people, being cool on whatever your space is, whether that's Instagram, let's be real, it's mostly Twitter where this happens. This can be really bad, and I've definitely seen it impact some people because they'll focus so much on the social aspects of being an author and being cool and being friends with the right people and being socially accepted. Like, of course we all get a high if we feel like, oh, hey, we're cool. I'm not cool, for the record, but I've seen people focus so much on that they appear to stop actually writing books, focusing on the part that we're here for, which is writing books, publishing books, writing good books, and it becomes far more about like, this is kind of when you see someone where it's more about who they are and their platform than it appears to be about actually writing books. And I think this is a flip of the hyper focusing on the social aspect of publishing and fitting in and being cool. I think for so many of us, publishing is like this second opportunity at high school. That's not a good thing. But I think that's why we see this. And if you find yourself in this mentality, we've all been sucked into a toxic friend group or two in publishing, and in high school, and in college, and in fandom. Like, it's a pattern. It's okay to forgive yourself for being pulled into this toxic mindset. Identify who your real friends are, stick to them, and back away slowly from all the social bullshit. That is my advice. I think you can reform yourself if you were at one time a social climber, but definitely be wary, and yeah. Which brings me to the sixth toxic mindset that I really hate, and this ties into the social stuff a lot, and that is agent/publisher shaming. Now, it is kind of natural to evaluate where someone is, especially when it comes to, I mentioned that whole debut thing. You know, you don't want to be the person who is going on and on and on and on about your problems. Let's say you're with a big 5 publisher and you're a lead title and you got a high 6-figure deal for your book. You do need to be socially aware of who you're talking to in terms of like, I personally wouldn't then complain to the person at a really small respected publisher who got a $10,000 advance. So there does have to be an awareness there in forming your social relationships and who you are talking to. But what persists far too often is snobbery. I see this in a two-pronged sense. I see it first before people get in, basically get agented, get a book deal. And this is the one that's semi-forgivable because we all do it. I have an entire video on why you shouldn't have a dream agent/dream publisher, but how it's okay if you do because we all do. It's like you shouldn't do it, but you're gonna do it, but don't do it. It's that thing. But there's a certain type of writer who gets way more toxic about this idea, where they define their self-worth, again, as a writer by a very short list of so-called A-list agents. They only want the best of the best, and if they can't get the best of the best, some people will respond to that as like, I hate them, they're horrible. But others will basically hyper-focus on this to the point of almost self-harm, in the sense that they will only consider this small list of the top. It's only these 10 agents, let's say, and it's big four. Now it's big four. Can we just, moment of silence for the big five. When I wrote this outline, it was the big five. It's the big four or bust, and you won't accept anything else. You're disappointed if it's scholastic. Which, just like chew on that for a minute. Like, you're allowed to have feelings about the big four, I relate, but it still can be a toxic thing of like, I've definitely seen this where someone is so into this mindset where they have said, all agents who aren't these 10 are garbage, and they've said it to a person who doesn't have one of those agents. And it leads to this snobbery that not only hurts yourself, but can lead to burning bridges and social relationships, of basically turning your nose down at what other people have. You deny yourself opportunities, you hurt yourself in the long run, because what can happen with this often, and I said this in the Dream Agent video, you'll be hyper-focusing on a very specific type of agent or publisher, and they're usually the biggest and the splashiest. But if you don't write books like that, if you are not that kind of writer, you're only hurting yourself, because you are telling yourself it's only good enough if it's this, and you're never gonna meet that bar. That doesn't make you bad, it just means maybe you shouldn't be with a shark agent, and you're not gonna get a $500,000 book deal from the splashiest commercial imprint. It doesn't make what might be right for you garbage by any stretch. So you hurt yourself, and then you piss off other people when you look down on what they have. And so the second prong of this, generally, regardless of where you are, it's usually people who are already in the industry, however, and that is looking down on people who you see as having lesser agents or lesser book deals, lesser success. This is a tricky one. I've actually talked about it in videos before where I have felt this as a writer. And it's also like it's the kind of thing that's hard to prove. But if you are an author who ends up not with like the biggest splashiest agent, who doesn't get the biggest splashiest book deal, who doesn't end up at the biggest splashier publisher, you will encounter this more than authors who might happen to have that as their publishing experience, and they might not believe you when you tell them this, but it's just true. It's like that person who blanks you at a party or is kind of dismissive toward you on a panel. It's like a feeling that you get, and that's a toxic mindset, and it's not cool. And especially, remember how I told you how publishing is like, you'll be here and then you'll end up here. That's my favorite thing. I know this is terrible. We're getting into my petty mindsets now. Because I love it when like that person who is all like, oh, like, you're not good enough. And then they have like a major setback. I am not happy about them having a major setback. Trust me. But it's fascinating to me how you see their empathy just like rapidly expand. And that's actually, I mean, hopefully it does. That's a good thing. But that's why it's a toxic mindset, because remember how I mentioned you're not gonna have any friends if you like are acting high and mighty and you're doing that social climbing thing. Very often that social climbing thing is based on this snobbery toward who your agent is, who your publisher is, whether you're a lead title or not, whether you're a bestseller, and that can really bite you in the butt. But got a self-own here. I have to self-own here because this isn't a cut and dry one. We naturally are going to categorize and judge people, and especially in the publishing industry. Do I have an immediate reaction when I meet someone, whether in person or online, and I see that they have a schmagent or a schmublisher, a bad publisher? Yes. And I definitely will go, I make an assessment and I make a judgment. Most of the time, me personally, I go, oh, I need to save them. That's me. Like, because I want to genuinely help authors who have maybe signed with someone that they shouldn't. And so I am going to err more on the side of, you know, I mean, I'll always go kindness forward. I'm not going to ignore someone. necessarily bandwidth permitting, because remember, we're getting into that whole thing where it's not always a dig on you or a slight if someone doesn't have the bandwidth to be friends with you. And so it's tricky because you might have those thoughts in your head. And I mean, even I am prone to, if I meet someone and they tell me they have XYZ agent or they're published by so-and-so, or I've heard of their book and I know they're a big deal, of course I'm gonna be like, I might have my own like star-studded moment, but the trick is the flip. Don't have the moment where you talk down to them, you look down to them, you totally lose interest in them. Just don't be the person who makes decisions on who is worth talking to based solely on things like their agent, where they're published, if they have an agent, if they're published, because that's the other thing. Like, I felt it when I was an aspiring writer, and I will tell you, I remember the authors who still took the time to treat me like an equal human being. God, like a peer. I definitely remember the ones. I remember authors who treated me like a peer from start to finish. The ones who were kind to me before I had even written a book, before I had an agent. I definitely remember the ones, because I've gone to various publishing events. I remember authors who talked to me straight on, one-on-one, like I was an equal peer, even when they were a New York Times bestseller and I was a baby debut that no one had heard of. That sticks with you. The slights don't stick with you as much, except sometimes they're memorable enough, but be the gracious, kind person who sees a person in front of them who's also in publishing, who is interesting, that you might want to talk to, and don't go, ugh, I've never heard of their agent, bye. The seventh toxic publishing mindset, I've ranted about this before, it's debut and buzz culture. This is so bad. It's bad for publishing, it's bad for authors, it's bad. So publishing created and has fueled this, particularly in YA, but authors feed into this and lean into this. Authors do, so do readers. And like, I get it from a practical level. It's the whole reason this happened is because there is a marketing hook to being new, to being fresh, to being unknown. And like, it's like any one of these could be amazing. I get it, we get it. And as creators, if you are a creator or a reviewer, media, etc., you're always looking for something new as well. New things are great. But we have taken it to an extreme. I've talked about the mid-list shriveling up. Debut culture is a huge part of it. I've talked about all sorts of market issues in YA. I have a whole video where I put the fear of God into everyone about YA dying. It's not, by the way. But what has definitely happened, we saturated YA very, very heavily, and we also went hard on debut culture. It's that excitement every year. Who are the new debuts? Who's gonna be our new potential darling? And then when books don't break out, we drop them like a hot freaking potato. Second book syndrome is very, very real. It's this awful, uncanny thing, and it can happen to the biggest of debuts, by the way. You can have an amazing debut experience, and then your second book comes out. No one cares. Your publisher definitely doesn't care. Twitter doesn't care. Buzz lists don't care. I'm not even talking about myself, by the way. There are friends, and it is horrifying seeing how they were treated on book 2 when they were no longer a sexy new debut. And the toxic mindset part is generally publishing, but we're talking on an individual level. Where this becomes really toxic on an individual level is it will eat you alive as an author. You will hate yourself if you lean into debut culture mindset. If you put all of your self-worth as an author on being a debut, on your debut experience, honestly, it kicks some people in the teeth so hard that they stop writing. A lot of the washout post-debut is authors who had such a bad experience, the high and then the low, or just the lows. Some people don't sparkle as much in debut season and debut mentality, and that feeling will tug at them and make them hate themselves. It's really hard to stand out in the crowd during debut year. And it's like the Hunger Games, honestly, and I have seen it ruin really wonderful writers. On both ends, by the way. I've seen it both lead to diva syndrome, like huge egos, treating people badly. A lot of the stuff I've already touched on. And I think that just ruins people. Most often, like sometimes they have a fall, but where it'll also happen is someone who kind of really leans into that toxic debut mentality and the breakout mentality. If they get that breakout, if they get what they want, they'll actually tend to, well, they'll burn their social bridges, but they will also often, not always, but often rest on their laurels with subsequent projects. And it can actually lead to their career stalling out later anyway, because like their books don't get any better. And I've also just, you know, I've just seen people where it just like, a lot of us are anxious, a lot of us are nervous, a lot of this is a dream and so much rides on it, but I've seen people just like get eaten up inside by hyper focusing. It's the comparison thing, it's jealousy, it's focusing on sales, it's attaching their self-worth to their sales. It's I've seen people nurse the bitterness for literally years. They cannot let go of not listing as a debut. They thought they were going to because they bought into the debut hype machine. Don't believe half the smoke that publishing blows up your butt, by the way. And they nurse that. They can never let go of it because they had an expectation for their debut year and that wasn't met and they can't let go of it. Don't do that. It's bad. I could probably go on more about this, but this video is already very, very long. But you're here for it. Like, if you're here at this part of the video, you're all in. You're gonna keep watching. I saved some of the juicy ones for last. Those of you that are still here, I appreciate you. So the 8th toxic writing mindset. This one was kind of in my harsh writing advice video, but it is one of the most toxic mindsets there is, so you know I'm gonna talk about it. I mean, that video was basically for people who have this toxic mindset. And that is people who want to be an author with a capital A, but don't actually do any of the writing, the craft, the sucky parts. They want the end result, the fun stuff, the glitzy, glammy stuff, but aren't willing to actually do any of the work. And this is one that cycles back a bit to the short-term mentality, the marathon but not a sprint. This is when it's usually aspiring writers, they get so locked into the idea of their dream, being a writer, being an author with a capital A, getting dream agents, selling a book, having the whole experience. They focus on that, building a platform. You will most often see this toxic mindset manifest in lots of platform building, lots of networking, lots of the social stuff, which is great. Do what you enjoy. But at the expense of writing, there's not actual writing going on. Or if there is, there's not editing going on, revision, like really focusing on writing a book. And either they rush their drafting. I have seen this, and they rush their drafting on multiple books. That was in the marathon, not sprint one, where it's like, okay, if this book didn't work, I'm gonna try another one. And so they rush their writing and they rush their querying at the expense of learning how to edit and kind of focusing on craft, which is definitely, I mean, it's gonna hurt you, period, in querying, because your work won't be good enough to get an agent. And what sucks is it might have been if you put in the time, but you don't want to do all of that work. You don't want to spend 6 months editing something. You don't want to wait. You want now, and then you blow your shot anyway. Or they never finish anything. It's working on the same book for years and years and years, and you have the dream, but you don't actually finish anything. Or I've also seen this manifest, this came up in the pitch contest one, as the writer who clings to one manuscript, one idea, continuously for years and years and years. Writing it forever, revising it forever, querying it, revising it again, querying it again, pitching it here, pitching it there. I'm talking years. It's all the same wheel spinning at the end of the day, to varying degrees. Obviously, if you finish something, you're slightly ahead of someone who doesn't finish something. But because of the focus on the dream, being a writer, making it, the end result is the goal, there's skipping of steps in between, and it's the skipping of everything in between that inadvertently actually holds you back from accomplishing the goal. It's the hard, boring, annoying stuff that is going to get you where you need to go. And the 9th toxic publishing mentality is attached to this. And where I've seen this one get really toxic is how it drags the person who has this mentality down in the face of rejection. And this is the toxic mentality of wanting publishing to be easy or expecting publishing to be easy and then getting upset when it is not. Taking the knocks especially hard. This ties into comparison game as well, because you've observed other people for whom it appeared to be easy. Thus, it should be easy for you too. And if it's not, you get angry. This is often the people who are going to like send death threats to agents when they reject them. Often, not always, sometimes. Anyway, so these are the individuals who think all they have to do is write a book and they're gonna be a unicorn success story. Here's the thing, sometimes that is true. Sometimes it happens for some people, but hyper-focusing on this idea that it should be you, and if it isn't you, you've been done dirty, essentially. It's also going to stop you from doing what we just talked about in the previous toxic mindset, which is doing all of the annoying, frustrating, hard, boring work that it actually takes to get good enough to be published. Good enough, or just, it's literally just a skill set that you need to develop. With this one, I've also seen this tie into the pitch contest thing again. It all comes together, where part of that, like, publishing should be easy is hyper-focusing on the pitch contest strategy, which is, I'm gonna have a sexy pitch. I just have to have an idea, a book that sounds sexy enough. It won't matter if it's written well, because I've got the angle. Maybe you built a platform and you think that's enough to sell your book. This is all basically short-sighted mindset, the mindset of really wanting it to be easy, but feeling that publishing owes you something. That's kind of the danger zone that I see. Because also often these individuals tend to refuse to edit substantially. No, my idea is amazing, like I'm ready, like publishing should recognize how amazing I am and then do the work with me. But no, you actually have to do the work first to prove that you can do the work. And look, some celebrities are gonna get that shortcut, but you hyper-focusing on the idea that you deserve that shortcut too, it's just gonna hurt you. And back to comparison is the thief of joy. The person in this toxic mindset is so focused on unicorn routes into publishing. They've read one too many stories, or they might even personally know a unicorn or two. Or it could be observing celebrities, people with massive platforms, or just really unusual pathways into publishing, and going, it should be like that for me. It should be that easy for me. I should have that. And if it doesn't come easily, it's everyone else's problem but theirs. And last but certainly not least, a really toxic publishing mindset that is not gonna earn you any friends, and that is the toxic mindset of IP books aren't real books. IP, intellectual property, is what that technically stands for. But IP is a situation where the author is hired by someone else to write an existing idea or for an existing property. This manifests in a lot of different ways. There's ghostwriting, which is really its own separate thing, but regardless, you're hired to write someone else's idea or someone else's story. There is packaged books. These are companies that come up with ideas. Sometimes they outline the whole book, sometimes they develop the idea with the writer, but it is their intellectual property, their idea, and they are hiring someone to write it. And then there are publisher IP books. This is where the publisher itself, an editor, will be like, oh, I wish we had a book like this. And they put feelers out with agents to hire an author to develop and write that idea. And then there's licensed IP. So those are the existing intellectual property books. These are the big ones that are most obvious to everyone. So that's writing a Star Wars book or a Disney princess book. So these are all cases where the idea, the concept, originates with someone else and the author is hired to write it. And there's a toxic mentality that we see, often it is privately, but sometimes people say it publicly, that these aren't real books, that the authors who write them are creatively bankrupt. There is no soul in those books because they didn't pour out of their beautiful minds and hearts and souls and bodies. And it's just such a toxic mindset, because the thing is, more books in publishing are IP than you know. More authors who you know and interact with and respect are writing them. And so you are basically saying to those writers that they are creatively bankrupt and that they are not as good as writers who write original books. I have so many feelings about this. First of all, IP is really hard. You have to write pretty quickly, usually to deadline. It's a collaborative writing experience, and I'll tell you, a lot of people like the collaborative writing aspect of IP. Don't knock it till you try it. I haven't done it, but like that part of it actually appeals to me, but I would not be able to write fast enough to do IP. I know this about myself. But also, I have observed personal friends, multiple personal friends, work on IP on both sides. I have friends who have written IP, and I also have friends who have worked at book packagers. And the amount of work that goes into it, it's very similar to an original book, quotes. And in most cases that I have observed, some IP holders are a bit more strict about what a writer can write. They're more likely to provide an outline, like, we want you to write this, but in a lot of cases, I gotta tell you, there's a lot of creative collaboration that goes on with IP projects, where the author is actually the driving force in what that book becomes. And in a lot of the cases of publishers doing IP, that's exactly what happens. They only start with a concept. It's very high concept, and they audition writers, and part of the audition for writers is that author has to prove what they are bringing to the table, their personal sensibility, their own creativity, how they would tell the story and move the story. And then if they're hired, they really mold what that book becomes. There are books you would not believe are IP, but they are. But I also know what they became. It was the author. The author did all of that work. As much work as any author who's developing their own idea from scratch. So I don't like it when people knock IP. So the reason this is a toxic mindset, it's the snobbery thing. Something isn't a real book. It's just like looking down on someone because they have a publisher that you don't think is as good as another publisher, or because they didn't sell as many copies as someone else. But also it's that you're up here and then you're down here thing. So the reality is, work for hire is also what this is sometimes called, can save a publishing career. I have seen people take work for hire opportunities in order to debut, and it's the reason they have a publishing career, and it was the springboard they needed into the industry. I have seen people have a disappointing debut who turn to work for hire, a disappointing debut or a very small press debut, but then they got a work for hire opportunity with a major publisher and it made their career. The reason you know their name is because they worked on a work for hire opportunity. I know a lot of mid-listers. Work for hire has kept a lot of people who were formerly part of a very healthy mid-list employed. It has kept them as working writers. Do not look that gift horse in the mouth, because you don't know how your career is going to do. And what's really dangerous about being such a dick about work for hire / IP is if you find yourself in a situation where you are no longer able to sell your original work because you don't have a platform, you don't have the sales, whatever it is, IP might save your career. And also, because so much is IP and we don't know what's IP, you could insult a New York Times bestseller. So maybe don't do that, because that person could have the power to impact your career. Yeah. So those are some of the toxic mindsets. Half of them boil down to don't be a jerk. So a lot of them boil down to don't make it harder for yourself. Don't make it worse for yourself. Don't make it so that you hate yourself and hate others. And some of them are just like, work on these if you really want to move forward with writing, with being happy with your writing, and with being published. These toxic mindsets will hold you back. Some are a little more like human than others and forgivable on a certain level, but still need to be worked on. Others are pretty terrible, and if you recognize yourself in some of these toxic mindsets, it's okay, you can work on them. We are all human, and I would not have a list of 10 toxic publishing mindsets if I hadn't experienced some of them myself, observed them in people who I am close to, and some people do fall flat on their face and schadenfreude and all of that stuff, but many people have come back from toxic publishing mindsets to be happier. Happier is the big one, but also more successful in the long term. So this one is juicy and fun, and I knew even when I sat down to film this, I'm sure there are more. I could probably do a part 2 if pressed. I want to know what some of the toxic publishing mindsets are that you have seen in others or even felt in yourself. Give this video a thumbs up if you like it, and I will make more long, rambly, discussion-style, salty videos about writing and publishing, and if you're not already subscribed to the channel, go ahead and do that. I post new videos 2 to 3 times a week. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and happy writing.